We've all seen popular video games like Helldivers, Elden Ring, this Funny Monkey game, and this piece of... We've all played these popular games, but what about the games that haven't broken through to the mainstream? Games that are hated on for being too difficult. Games that drew a ton of negative attention because of what the publishers did. And overall just smaller games that you might have never heard of. How are you liking Ghostrunner? Is it a good game?
He's conscious, and he's just used some...
Connor? Connor!
Ghostrunner is a great game. It's separated into many levels as we can see how society has fallen so low, but you didn't get Ghostrunner for the story. Ghostrunner has 18 different missions, but before I talk about the missions, I'm gonna have to talk about... I'm going to be talking about Ghostrunner 1 and Ghostrunner 2. Their movement are a little bit different. When Ghostrunner 2, everything is stamina based. You've got a stamina bar, you can block, you can dodge, and you can slow down time with the stamina bar. When you slow down time, you can dodge bullets and you can strafe side to side. In Ghostrunner 2, there is no stamina bar. Instead, you've got dash charges, and with a dash charge, you can either dash on the ground, or if you're in the air, you can use it to do the sensory overdrive, which is when you slow down time and you can strafe around bullets before dashing to kill your enemies. I think the closest game to compare Ghostrunner 2 is something like Doom, but instead of having multiple weapons to slay demons, you only have a sword. This changes it up, so instead of being required to use different weapons on different teams, you'll have to use different moves to dodge different enemies in different maps. Levels are all about speed. If you're slow, you die. If you're fast, you probably won't get hit. But to reinforce this idea even more, they made it that at the end of every level, you get a time and a death count. So you can redo levels over and over again to try and get a faster time or a lower death count. Me and my other mate who got Ghostrunner had a competition to see who could beat the first boss in the fastest time. In the end, he won, but he only won because the boss glitched and freezed out. But through my entire playthrough and through his entire playthrough, we didn't experience any other glitches that were game breaking. So the game is still pretty well polished. This list is just morely me talking about games that I think are underrated, but this game I would actually recommend buying because I managed to find it on CD keys for only £3. On Steam, at full price, it sells for £45, but most of the time it's at least 50% off. And of course, getting it on CD keys for £3 is crazy for a game that can take around 21 hours to beat on your first playthrough, where you can redo the levels over and over again to try and get faster or find secrets such as like hidden swords.
Come here. But if we don't do it, it's gonna cost us our lives. So this is how the climbers operate. Fascinating. One Ghostrunner to do the job, and a whole bunch of deadbeats to slow it down.
Kira, this isn't helpful.
Dragon's Dogma is a game you've probably heard of, but probably avoided because of its negative reviews. The game was review bombed when it was launched for having tons of microtransactions, but they don't really affect the gameplay. It's not like the game was made with these microtransactions in the thought process of making the game. It's not like they made the game harder unless you brought these things. I still think it's very scummy, but the game is still very good, and it's definitely just the fault of the publishers just adding microtransactions as the game was released. So that's why you might have not heard of Dragon's Dogma, and that's why it might not have been as popular as it could have been. But now we've talked about why the game has fallen, let's talk about the game itself. Dragon's Dogma is an open world RPG where you have a party of you, your created pawn, and 2 other pawns created from other people playing through the game. So you might have a party of all warriors, a mixture of mages, fighters, and rogues. You can customize your party as far and as much as you want. The combat is as over the top as it gets. You're climbing on massive monsters the size of cities, taking out their weak spots or gouging their head over and over again until they fall and get knocked down so you can execute them. There are loads of different classes in the game, and in the game they're called vocations, and these vocations decide what weapon you use, what skills you use, and your general play style. You can change your pawn's vocation and hire specific vocations for the rest of your party. The combat is, to be honest, more basic than I thought, but when you play it and you realise how much the monsters can do, you realise the true potential of the game. I don't actually have a clip of this, but when I was fighting a golem, a griffin managed to attack me as well, and we managed to cut off the golem's head and aim it at the griffin and then shoot it down because the head just randomly shoots lasers. This is just one of the interactions in the game, and there's loads with every single boss enemy. You can cut off Medusa's head and use it as a weapon to one-shot anything in the game. You can cut off Saurian's tails and then get guaranteed critical hits and backstabs. You can disarm ogres, you can fly on griffins, you can do so much with the monsters in this game, and the game actually really revolves around what you're fighting and understanding what it can do and what it can't do, and using that to win the fight. I think a good example of using the enemy's weakness is griffins and how they would fly away after being injured, but what you can do is use fire damage to set their wings on fire so they can't fly. This keeps them on the ground and lets you get loads of big hits in, and with those big hits come staggers, and with staggers come loads of damage. I could talk about the interactions in this game for so long, but we have to talk about the rest of the game, which is where the game's a little bit more disappointing. Travelling is better than the first game if anyone's played Dragon's Dogma 1, but it's still really bad. You can travel on ox carts and you can use fairy stones to fast travel, but except for that, you're going to be travelling on a foot. The fast travel is pretty unique in the game, where there's only a couple set fast travel points, and the other fast travel points you actually set up yourself, which I kind of like the idea of, but then sometimes it can be pretty hard to get your hands on fast travel points, and I do think that the game encourages travelling by foot, which would be good, but the game is very boring travelling on foot, and in certain regions you could be just swarmed by mobs. I think overall the travelling early on is pretty good, but later on in the game it just gets tedious. I also have to talk about the story. The story, I don't really get how the quest line even works. I don't know how many quests you need to do for the first night guy you talk to, or which quest was even the main quest, which is kind of good. It shows that the side quests are actually well made, and a lot of them have loads of different endings. For example, you've got a sculptor who wants you to fight a griffin, and if you turn the griffin to stone for him so he can get a better drawing and make a better sculpture, Griffiner, you get tons of money, but if you just kill the Griffin really quickly and he gets a bad sketch of the Griffin, you fail the quest. However, the main story does just feel like a ton of side quests strung together. The only quests I really liked from the main story is a fight where you fight a massive golem and you have to break all the crystals on it before it reaches the volcano. And another fight I really enjoyed was the final dragon fight, but except for that, the rest of the main story was just not fun at all. Even though I might sound quite negative of the game, and I'm probably not going to do another playthrough for a while, I still think that more people should play it. It's still a very good game with a very unique combat system, and once you start playing it, you will love it for the first 10 or 20 hours, but later on it does slow down a lot. Nine Souls is just 2D Sekiro. It is a Metroidvania about a cat in a cyberpunk world using chi to parry robots and mutants so you can attach chi bombs to delete them from existence. Because this game's a Metroidvania, of course I have to compare it to Hollow Knight, where the world is of course very similar, where you explore a certain area, unlock a new ability, to then go to new areas to find new abilities. But all the abilities don't just help you in traversing the map, but they also help you combat. For example, you've got a charged sword that can break down walls, but you can also use the charged sword to kill enemies. You also get an ability that lets you parry mid-air, so you can ping off of certain obstacles and go to new places in the world, but you can also use this to bounce off of enemies during attacks to do a ton of posture damage and gain some chi. You even get a upgraded version of your parry that takes time to charge up, but this parry is not only used in combat, but it's also used to interact with the world, as you can parry certain traps to destroy walls, destroy engines and open up new areas. The last thing I need to talk about, which is similar to Hollow Knight, is the talismans. You can customize your character by adding different buffs and negative effects to your character, and you've only got a certain amount of slots and talismans that you find throughout the game. You can really change your character's combat, and as you can see through the clips, you have to build your character fit the boss fight. For example, the first boss I showed was this boss that only really uses melee attacks, so I can use parries to inflict a ton of internal damage, and then I use talismans so I also take internal damage, and I can move the internal damage onto the enemy through my upgraded parry. But in the second boss fight, the boss only uses ranged attacks and has very few melee attacks, so I can't actually build up a lot of internal damage so I can get big hits. Talking about internal damage, because I didn't talk about it in combat, basically enemies have health that you can just take away from hitting them, but you can also take away some enemies' health by using counters. Using the counters can build up this internal damage, which when you use a chi attack like the chi bomb, you can make them lose all their internal health and take huge damage. Its combat is very similar to Sekiro, where you parry basic attacks and projectiles, jump over stabbing red attacks, and dodge overhead red attacks. Sekiro is the same, where there is basic attacks and two main red attacks, which you have to learn from different enemy movesets, and of course the different red attacks are dealt with in different ways. The NPC quests feel really good. They have no quest markers. Yeah, I rarely got stuck. It's kind of like Dark Souls quests if they actually made sense. The story is cryptic yet interesting, and it's just a great game overall. It's also on Xbox Game Pass. Remnant 2 is just Dark Souls but with guns. If you like Souls games, you'll probably like this game. The game is set in loads of different worlds as you travel between them to try and kill the root. But the interesting thing about how Remnant does its levels is they're all just random rooms put together, and every time you load into a new world, it can have a totally different ending. Every world has 2 routes where you can fight different final bosses and find different puzzles that are just for that specific world. For example, the world Yeisha can have this music puzzle which leads to the final boss, which is the deer and the wolf. Or you can be helping the queen the next time you load into Yeisha to fight a different final boss, which is this massive mech with 4 swords. This game's combat is actually not very good, and I don't think a lot of people enjoy it. The game really works well with making a good build, because so many items are hidden, and with the randomly generated levels, it's always a unique way of finding them. It's always harder than just searching up where is the item. But this does mean if you need a specific item for your build, you have to reload worlds over and over again until you get the right seed to get the item, which can be really annoying. But if you're just going through your first playthrough, it can be really fun of just getting a ton of random items and managing to form a build around those items. The game has loads of bosses, loads of replayability, and just loads of content overall because of the random nature of the game. The story of the game is kind of crap, but it makes up in story with loads of the mini quest lines. Like, in this town area, you can get a staff that can go into people's dreams, and then with different NPCs in different worlds, you can go into their dreams to get specific items, which is like a really cool idea. There's loads of like these mini stories of like NPCs that like interact with each other, and sometimes they appear in your base, which is Ward 13, which is like your Firelink shrine. And then with these quest items, let's say you didn't finish a quest, you can just hand it into some of these NPCs and they'll give you totally different quest rewards. So you have to redo levels to get different endings and different items, but you also have to redo the missions and like the tiny quests in those levels to get the quest items to hand it into other people from other worlds, so you can get different rewards. The game just goes so deep with so much replayability. Overall, if you like RPG games, you'll love this game. If you like Souls-likes, you might not, because this game is still very different to Dark Souls and other Souls-likes. But if you're like me, and you love RPGs and you love Souls-likes, you'll definitely enjoy this game. Even if you don't replay it over and over again, you'll at least beat it a couple times before getting bored. You might have avoided it because it's a horror game. I personally don't play like any horror games, even though I've got loads of free horror games on Game Pass. But Phasmophobia is different because it's a multiplayer horror game, and there's loads of multiplayer horror games, but this game actually nails the multiplayer part. You go into a haunted house and you have to cooperate and find clues to figure out which ghost is haunting that house. You'll go around with boxes to talk to the ghost, books to see if the ghost can write, and torches to see UV prints. And after spotting 3 clues and ticking them off, you can figure out what ghost it is. At the start, it's fairly easy, but as you play the game and unlock new gear and new difficulties, the game progressively gets harder and harder. Eventually, the ghost doesn't even give you evidence, and you have to lure out the ghost to hunt you where the doors of the house are locked and you're stuck with the ghost. The ghost will try and kill you, and it's super fun being hunted when there's multiple players just running and screaming. But the best part is then you have to figure out what ghost it is without any evidence. which makes this game just have a huge skill ceiling, and getting better at the game feels really good. As I was saying with the multiplayer aspect, the game's actually really fun. It's got things like this box that can talk to ghosts called the spirit box, and you only can talk to the ghost if the player is alone in a dark room with the ghost, where the ghost is more likely going to interact with that player, and it can lead to a lot of funny moments. You also got the walkie-talkie system, where the walkie-talkie will bug out when the ghost is near you when hunting. Overall, the game's got a very simple concept, but it takes a lot of skill to master the game. And actually, I enjoy it a lot, and I think that even if you don't play horror games, if you get your friends to get this game and you all go together to find some ghosts, it can be a really good time.